this session is going to be brought to you by Ruben from IOActive. His talk is called SATCOM Terminals Hacking by Air, Sea, and Land. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming. This is SATCOM Terminals Hacking by Air, Sea, and Land. I'm going to talk about the security of, or the lack of security of some of the most widely deployed satellite terminals out there. The agenda we've got for today is introduction, a very brief introduction to the satellite architecture, and then methodology, vulnerabilities with some demos, and finally some funny vendor responses. Well, I'm Ruben Santamarta, IOActive Principal Security Consultant. I'm mainly focused on reverse engineering, research, embedded software, and that kind of things. Well, I'm not going to say anything new about satellite, about it's not working? Okay, there is no camera for that. Well, anyway, I have to continue. Well, I'm not going to say anything new about satellite communications. As you know, the physical limitations of the terrestrial networks make SATCOM plays a vital role in the global telecommunication systems. There are several sectors that rely on SATCOM, for example, maritime, industrial, the military, aerospace, emergencies, or even media. Well, basically, the satellite infrastructure can be divided into two major segments, the space segment and the ground segment. Our research was focused on the ground segment, specifically all those mobile earth stations or ship earth stations or aircraft. We have more than 20 devices affected, also a bunch of vendors involved, some big players in the field. Let's talk about methodology. When researching into devices that are used on aircraft, on board an aircraft, or ships, or vessels, military facilities, ideally, one should have access to those environments. But the reality is quite different. For example, the Aviator product costs a minimum of $200,000. If you want a cargo ship, good luck with that, because you should be preparing like $10 million. So the actual research environment is something like this. So jokes aside, basically this means I followed a static analysis approach, mainly based on two main points: the information gathering stage and the reverse engineering. During the information gathering stage, we have to collect as much information as possible from data sheets, multimedia material, success cases, manual, press releases, and during the reverse engineering stage, we are basically mapping features into code. All the technical slides I'm showing today follow the same pattern. I present a document from the vendor describing a feature, and then we'll see how that feature has been actually implemented in the firmware. Well, reverse engineering, we don't have access to the physical device, but we do have access to the firmware, and also to software, for example, configuration software, management, upgraders, and that kind of things. Let's get right into the important things. This research wasn't focused on finding memory corruption or integer overflows, buffer overflows. Believe me, there are quite a few, but we weren't interested in that kind of things. So our research was focused on understanding how those devices were actually working. So the findings can be divided into four main groups: hard-coded credentials, backdoors, insecure protocols, and undocumented protocols. At this point, there are no patches, and we don't expect some for several issues. So let's talk about Air. Just to put things into context, let me briefly introduce you the aircraft data network domain model, described in the ARINC 64 standard. So there are different domains inside an aircraft. For example, the passenger information and entertainment services and the passenger-owned devices share the same purpose, which is basically entertain the passenger. Then we have some other domains that are way more critical. For example, the aircraft control domain and the airline information services. The interesting part is that these domains share a common equipment, which is the SATCOM, comprised of the SDU and the SBU at a minimum. So this opens the door to perform cross-domain attacks between domains that have different criticality. It's worth mentioning this document from the FAA on special conditions for the Boeing Model 787. If you read the highlighted part, you can see how Airbus stated that, well, if we have to physically separate all the domains, there we have a problem because resources such as SATCOM need to be physically connected. I think that's important to the kind of things we are going to see today. So let's focus on the first target in the aerospace sector, the Aviator 700D, which is certified for providing security and safety communications for the aircraft. You can read in the white paper an introduction to the certification levels used in avionics. So as you can see in the slide, we have two different units. The SBU, which stands for Satellite SwiftBroadBand Unit, and the SDU, which can be considered the core of a SATCOM equipment on board an aircraft. It's the Satellite Data Unit. So this picture comes from the official documentation of the vendor. So as you can see, the SBU contains a built-in wireless access point, also a built-in router. So from the in-flight entertainment network, you can reach the SBU. From the Wi-Fi, you can reach the SBU. So from the security perspective, this unit poses an interesting attack target. So technically, the Aviator SBU can be configured through a web interface, which is based on Savante, a Lua web server. Well, it's MIPS, it's built on top of ECOS, the firmware. Then the firmware has a proprietary layer from Frame and Frame, which is the company that originally developed that firmware. There are no symbols, but, well, there are many traces, so it's useful. So the attack surface is massive, but we are going to be focused on the man-machine interface because that's the preferred way to configure the unit. This picture also comes from the official documentation, and it's very important for our purposes. If you read the highlighted part, the documentation states that you can view all SBU settings from any interface. So despite the fact that some settings are stored in a separated piece of hardware that contains a flash memory, basically, that it's protected by hardware, there are some other settings that can be modified without access to that piece of software, piece of hardware, which is called the configuration module. So I would like to make some clarifications because maybe you have read the media. Cobham, which is the company that develops this product, claims it's impossible to attack the SBU through Wi-Fi, since physical access is required. But I don't agree because the Aviator MMI uses that function. Lua is Aero CM write protected, works. It's basically checking whether the configuration module is enabled to write access, and that function and the way they have implemented that can be easily bypassed, as we are going to see in just a few minutes. So it's also worth mentioning, it's also important to mention that any interface can access the SBU, so that's the key. The Aviator product actually protects some settings in the flash file system, but some other settings are not protected. So the Aviator SBU firmware checks the configuration module write protection only when updating those settings, not when updating firmware files or other settings, for example, the administrator password. So, as a result, we can say that the SBU can be attacked through the Wi-Fi. This is how they implemented the security in the MMI. So, when they detect that a user is not properly authenticated or when the functionality requires being connected to the maintenance port, they add disabled attribute to a button or to an input. So this is seriously But for example, you can see in the picture the Lua scripts that are used to upload the firmware. So, but if you think you are cheating and you want to be a real administrator, you can use another vulnerability. For example, the prediction of the administrator reset password. Well, basically, any SATCOM device from Cobham that supports MMI contains a feature that if you forget your administrator password, you can ask your service provider for a reset code in order to add a new administrator password. So when I was analyzing this feature, it seems you can generate your own password because the algorithm is like this, basically. So they use the device serial number, they use a hard-coded string, in this case the last part is redacted, and the MD5 is the reset code. So you can become an administrator in any of those products just by using this. But the interesting thing is how they implement the firmware upload feature. So the Savante web server contains a rule that matches the upload image URL to a Lua script. So basically it's a upload file implementation that is handled by 4 different functions in that order. If we look at the firmware to see how those functions have been implemented, we see that the first one, DL init, initializes the DL directory to hold the files. Then the DL feed writes the tar file you are sending in the post request and handles that file. This firmware file should contain a manifest file in the form you can see in the picture, just a checksum. It's not signed, just verified by that checksum, and then a path. So the DL finish checks that everything is okay with the main CPU file, which contains the SBU firmware. So if everything is okay, the version is okay, the platform is okay, it copies that file to the original one and renames the old one to main CPU.all. And then DL reboots the terminal. This function by itself is an attack vector because you can reboot the terminal, and that's not good. But the interesting part obviously is we have the ability to upload new firmware to the SBU. At this point, we have compromised the SBU from the in-flight entertainment network or the LAN or the Wi-Fi access point. And the interesting thing is to see how we can pivot from the SBU to the SDU, or if there is any change to do so. So in fact, it turns out the SDU and the SBU are connected through the serial interface you can see there. This comes from the documentation as well. So I analyzed how that connection worked, and it turns out there is an internal protocol called LLH that is used to communicate between boards or threads or tasks in real-time operating systems. But this, the packet, the structure of the packet is basically what you can see there. We have a packet header and then the payload, length, the opcode or the function you want to invoke, and then the destination of the communication, and then the source. Those ID and sequence fields sometimes are used, sometimes not. So we can, so there are several boards in the different units, SDU and SBU. For example, the SBU can talk only with the SDU. The SDU can talk with so many boards. And in the slide, you can see the kind of functions you can invoke from the SBU and the SDU. That's obviously a way to create, to expect something goes bad at the SDU. Obviously, it's a good target for fuzzing as well, but we can't elaborate this scenario without the physical access to the device. And then, well, let's move to the SDU, the satellite data unit. Well, it's PowerPC, no symbols, but again, some traces. The SDU can be configured in some ways, in a couple of ways, through the MCDU, which is basically the computer that controls the flight management system. It's located in the cockpit, so that's way restricted. It's an attack vector, but if you have physical access to the MCDU, there are quite a few things, nasty things you can do. So the interesting thing is this SDU can be configured through the full-feature handset, which is more accessible. So if we read the documentation, there are 3 levels because some functions require a PIN. We have the normal user, we have the super user, and we have the service provider. But if we look at the firmware, there is another level, which is the backdoor level, as usual. You can see here how the authentication for the PIN is implemented. In the green, in the yellow basic block, you have the backdoor authentication. In the green basic block, you have the legit authentication. And this is how basically works. In the legitimate authentication, well, its PIN is locally stored after being transformed through a series of logical operations, nothing special. They use the SDU serial number to create different values for the same PIN, and also a fixed 24-bit value. So when the user enters the PIN, it goes through the same algorithm, and then is being compared. But the backdoor is different. It's totally the opposite. The backdoor authentication is the PIN is always that number. The serial number is backdoor, which is very original. To prevent backdoor PIN reuse, they use these values, the ICAO 24-bit address, which is basically the ID of an aircraft. Each registered aircraft has this address, and they also use the current date. So if you want to generate a valid backdoor, you need the ICAO address of the target aircraft. So if we generate a valid backdoor, we can modify settings, we can reboot the terminal, we can turn off the terminal, and we can do nasty things. Obviously, we are not crashing airplanes with these vulnerabilities. That has to be clear. That said, with these attacks, one can be used to disrupt or to modify satellite data links. There are several communication channels on an aircraft that rely on the satellite communication, so that may be a problem. Let's move to the sea. Well, the Silor products are also developed by Cobham, and they connect through TrainLink, which is a sophisticated communication protocol that connects the Silor product in a network. So obviously, we have to know how that works, and basically it's two main parts. The discovery stage, which is based on SLP, Service Locator Protocol, and the management, which is SNMP. So if you want to look for TrainLink devices, you have to send the SLP request to the network and see what kind of services respond with those attributes. The interesting part is the SNMP, because there are 4 different groups that implement some functionalities. The software downloads allows to upload new firmware, and that's an interesting feature. You can see a common architecture for the Silor GMDSS system in the picture. So, well, you can spoof devices, yes, by using this if you want. So I was analyzing several firmware from several devices, and basically there are some differences, but they use the same approach. They use SMB with some OIDs that basically allow you to set a server from where the device is going to download a firmware file. You can obviously set the file name, the part number, which by default is DFTP, the IP address, and then there are some other OIDs that are intended to keep track of the update progress. So the TrainLink firmware update basically works as that. You have to create a malicious firmware, set up a DFTP server, send the SLP request to discover a device, and then set the DFTP server, the file name, and finally set the download control to trigger the firmware upload. And then some fun. So the last thing we have to know is how the firmware file is structured. I analyzed the internal tool they use to parse the firmware file to discover how the firmware is structured. It's basically a magic and then some streams. There are 2 main streams. One, the class ID number 1, which is basically for overall description, and then we have the class ID 4, which is content stream. Then we have, well, the typical fields. Everything is checked using CRC, checksum. We have the body size, the timestamp, IDs, data. So let's see a demo. This terminal you can see here is used in the maritime sector to receive or to send information or to receive information from the different entities. That information is vital for the safety of the aircraft, or for the safety of the ship or the vessel or the crew. So this terminal is mandatory for certain kind of vessels. Basically, there are 2 ways to upload firmware: the physical way through USB, and the remote way, which is the interesting part. So let's just right now it's trying to detect through SLP. Then this is not physical access. If you are on the same network, that's, as far as I know, that's not physical access, as some vendor claims. And then we can upload new firmware. This terminal is used to send a distress call if the crew or the ship is facing a critical situation. They can send a distress call by pressing the red button, and that distress call is sent to the Rescue Coordination Center in order to trigger some procedures to rescue the people. So we are uploading new firmware to the terminal. There is no security at all. So if you can reach the terminal, it's over. This terminal is part of GMDSS equipment, which is the Global Maritime Distress and Safety System. It's an international agreement to set up some procedures or equipment that are intended to increase the safety of the operation at sea. This console is part of, this terminal is part of GMDSS console, and it's interesting because in 20 years ago, the International Maritime Organization state that these devices should be protected against the effect of computer viruses 20 years ago. But, well, it takes some time. The Global Maritime Distress and Safety System is operated through the Inmarsat infrastructure. They also can be operated through radio. It depends on the location of the ship. And the terminal should reboot now. It's rebooting, so a new firmware has been uploaded. And we are going to try to send a distress call because we are facing a critical situation. Well, you see the terminal again. Well, you can navigate from the different. And if we press the distress button instead of the distress function, we are in Vegas, so a slot machine. I promise I'm not cheating. Yeah, that's a lot machine. Well, so that's the demo, and let's continue. Well, another part of the GMDSS installation is the Silor, the mini-C terminal. If we read the documentation, there are some interesting things. For example, we see that it supports a remote cell interface that has 4 different authority levels: normal, super, sysadmin, and distributor. You can send remote commands to that terminal by using this remote interface, but those commands should be authenticated by a password. So there are 6 levels in the firmware. the documented ones and the undocumented. We can retrieve the passwords from that function, which is intended to restore the default factory passwords. So the next step is to find where those remote commands are parsed. So basically, when they detect that a message to that terminal has been received, they try to find that magic, which stands for the train and train over-the-air command. So if we analyze the authentication for those commands, again, there is a document for the documented account. The password is checked in clear text, but for the undocumented accounts, it's interesting because they still use the hard-coded password, but they encrypt that password with the PCB number, which is unique per terminal. So the encryption is not really encryption. That's a series of logical operations, like in the other case, so you can replicate that algorithm. So next step is to find the commands that are implemented. There are 48 commands. Each command belongs to one of the 46 cell command categories. And there are commands to perform different tasks. For example, we can set up the terminal with some common settings. We can actually modify some settings for the SSAS system, which stands for SIP Security and Alert System, which is a series of procedures, a mechanism implemented or intended to provide the crew with a mechanism to trigger an alarm when they are facing a terrorist attack or an act of piracy. So we can modify where that alert is sent, which is not a good idea. We can send files, we can receive files, we can delete files, we can modify settings for the enhanced group call, which is also a service by which the crew receives information about, for example, meteorological warnings to increase the safety, so we can spoof data as well. And also some settings for configuring the distress and alerts. So each cell command category needs an authorization level, and it's curious because some commands require a privilege that it's only granted by the undocumented accounts. So obviously this backdoor is also remote. You don't need physical access to send that kind of commands. You can use another terminal, or you can send those commands from the ground. We can also use the ThreadLink firmware upload to repurpose, to modify binaries, and even create malformed frames to attack the Inmarsat infrastructure. And finally, let's talk about land. These are the most widely deployed Inmarsat BGAN terminals manufactured by Hughes. They are VxWorks, some interfaces, USB, Ethernet, Wi-Fi. The BGAN stack is developed by a Danish company called Gatehouse, which also offers spying services. Hughes firmware is really nice because it's deployed with the symbol table. It can be updated through FTP. It contains debug, test, in-house functionalities, traces, anything you want. There are different vendors that use that firmware, and it's interesting because we don't have access to a terminal used by the military, but since the firmware is pretty similar, in some way we are accessing that. The first thing I came across was the SYN protocol, which is an undocumented protocol, binary protocol that can be exploited in those terminals. It listens on 1827 TCP. There are dozens of functions implemented, and you can do anything you want. You can modify the firmware, you can read memory, you can write memory. Obviously, you can execute arbitrary code. You can reboot the terminal, you can test the physical layer, anything. There are dozens of functions, so you have complete terminal control. The binary protocol is pretty simple. You have the function ID, and then depending on the function ID, there are different parameters. You can see some of the functions implemented. All of them begin with diac, which is because apparently it's some kind of diagnostic protocol according to the vendor. Obviously, the boring part, hard-coded credentials. Most embedded devices have hard-coded credentials, and these devices are not an exception. You can use those hard-coded credentials to upload new firmware through an FTP server that those terminals contain, also for Thuraya. But there is another interesting feature. For example, in the Hughes terminal used to SCADA and machine-to-machine operations. So basically, you can configure from a remote location, you can configure that terminal in two ways, through an SMS or through a web interface. You need a password to access those interfaces. If we look at the authentication for those features, then we see again an interesting feature. If you fail with your original password, you have another opportunity. In the yellow basic block, you can see that there is another comparison before failing, and there is a function called ATC IFAC man authenticated admin code. If we look at that function, we see that they are deriving a backdoor password based on the IMEI number from the terminal. So if you know the IMEI, which for example is printed in the terminal, which is not very secret, or third-party vendors can know also, basically you can generate a password that will be accepted in the remote interfaces. If we look at the SMS authentication, pretty much the same function, so you can send an SMS to configure the terminal. If we look at the commands that can be sent through the SMS, we see one especially promising, which is the ATCO that can be used to embed AT commands inside the SMS. If we look at the commands, AT commands that are supported, we find an interesting AT command, which is the get firmware file from an FTP server, and then trigger firmware update. So basically, we can send a remote, we can send us an SMS containing this AT command to tell the terminal that, okay, download a firmware file from this FTP server and trigger the firmware update. So we can compromise the terminal with an SMS without knowing the right password. But it's also interesting because if you buy this terminal, you qualify for free over-the-air upgrades. If we analyze how that works, we see that they are using the same AT command. If you don't pass any parameter, they use the default one. So there is an FTP server which can be accessed once you are authenticated through the APN, and there are some hard-coded credentials that can be used to access the FTP server. Obviously, the problem is if those credentials have right access to the FTP server, because you can upload a firmware file and then all the terminals will be infected. But it's something that I didn't try, so I'm not going to to say anything. But well, if you want security in your terminal, there is a feature called enhanced security mode, which blocks everything in the terminal except a web interface. So we can't exploit the SYN undocumented protocol. We can't access the FTP server. So we need a way to bypass that. Again, if we analyze the authentication for that feature, we find a pretty similar feature than in the other one. You have a legitimate password, and then if you fail, you have a backdoor password. If we look at the function, they are also deriving the backdoor password from the IMEA with several modifications from the previous algorithm, but it's pretty much the same. This terminal is widely used by the media. It's curious. For example, you can see a picture of some journalists using this terminal during the Ukrainian conflict. So we are going to test the backdoor password. I don't know what time, okay. Okay, so this is the terminal with the enhanced security mode activated. We need a security password. We are going to use the backdoor this time. Oh. Ah, fuck. Okay. 8, 6, 1, 5, 7, 4, 7. Okay, we can well, if you want to activate this feature, you need to buy that feature. So you have to send your IMEI to the service provider, and then they return you an admin a code to activate that feature. Eventually, you can generate your own code, but that's another matter. So we can test with we can use Black Hat. Black. You can see the password, Black Hat, here, that has been sent. Okay, so we are going to lock the unit, and instead of the Black Hat password, we are going to use the backdoor password. And it worked. And you can see the password we have sent. it's here. So if you want security, it's not a good idea to have a password, a backdoor. And finally, some vendor responses. Well, Cobham claims that from a network security perspective, the devices can therefore only be subject to attacks if the attacker has either physical access to the device or segment, or the network has been installed incorrectly. That obviously never happened, because well, maybe that's the reason why I found vulnerable vessels on the internet. So also the over-the-air commands require user authentication based on a specific password. So you can't use hard-coded credentials, which is technically true because they are encrypting the hard-coded credentials, but it's not actually true. Iridium, we didn't see any, but we didn't see any vulnerability because, well, it's basically you can upload new firmware without authentication. They also have hard-coded credentials, the usual thing. I love this one. This is from Hughes. So this is about the hard-coded credentials. They say that, well, it's okay, we have hard-coded credentials, but that's not a problem because in most Unix and Linux machine, FTP and Telnet 6, and people don't set password, and everybody is happy. And then this is even better. Okay, we have backdoors, but this is good. It's a really good thing. So this is common practice in commercial electronic products that support user-selected passwords. So the NSA is really happy with this. Wow. Well, they basically acknowledged the vulnerabilities, but they say it's okay. The conclusions, if someone can remotely or physically reach your SATCOM device, it's over. Backdoors, hard-coded data, avoid using insecure protocols. Avoid using cryptography. It's not. You have to use cryptography. This is some kind of error. And we are just scratching the surface, but there is still a long way to go. So thank you for coming. This is it.